people are contradictory in nature. They will say they want subsidized social welfare for people in the form of SRD grants, but don't you dare touch their private healthcare. So over 60% of young people would prefer dictatorship, the style of what's happening in Rwanda and what Singapore had with Lee Kuan Yew versus democracy. Dockets, the police, the security cluster and the intelligence, all of that is proving more and more through testimony to be captured and systematically undermined. My generation is looking for our Messiah, which is problematic because there is no Messiah coming.
Welcome back to Palatable Politics, where we make politics palatable. With me, host TJ Maslela. Welcome to the show. Today, we're going to be discussing So We Vote, youth participation, and not only how we get the youth involved, but how we create the future that we want to see and be. Here to give us insights and educate us is the Executive Chairman of So We Vote, Otsile Nkadimeng. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, TJ. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so glad you've agreed to be answering all of my questions for you today.
Wow. No. I'm not ready for that. But yeah, we'll
find something.
Why politics?
Why not? We live in a particularly disorientating time for people generally. It doesn't matter whether you view yourself as political or non-political. The world feels more and more like a dumpster fire, and you tie that, you follow the thread, you keep pulling on it, it ultimately leads back to politics. It leads to the fragile state of domestic politics, the fragile state of international politics as a result of people failing to understand the value of democracy, the power of their vote, and the role they play in actually building a good society. And, politics just, I came to the conclusion a very long time ago, it matters, but my background, maybe partially that's due to my background. I come from a family you'd call political, pretty much in the struggle on both ends, mom and dad. My grandfather really spearheading, being the one who got me most interested in politics. He was involved in the ANC, the trade union movement. So I grew up in that environment. Perhaps that's what it is. But I think fundamentally, it was just seeing the world around me the way it is. Like, I don't think anyone looks at the way the world is right now, much less how it looked 10 years ago and 10 years before that, and says, this is a very healthy state we're in. It's not. And so, yeah, that's why.
And who is Otsile Nkadimeng? Who is he? What does he do from a day to day, and your journey?
Yeah. Otsile Nkadimeng it was the first time talking about myself in third person. I am, at boilerplate level, I say I'm a second year Bachelor of Commerce in Law student. So being a student is my day job. But on top of those things, I also am the executive chairman of So We Vote. I recently co-founded an AI fintech company called Paco. And it's Paco. It's a very great initiative. There's 4 of us founders. And on top of those things, I serve on the youth advisory board for the Embassy of Sweden. I'm a fellow for a few institutes, and I'm a contributor with SMWX, and I co-host the Born Free podcast with Mail and Guardian. How did I get you? Sometimes I ask myself that question, especially on like on a Tuesday evening. When I'm like, yo, guys, Nkatel. I think, obviously, one, it goes back to family again. I grew up in a family of busybodies. No one at home was an inactive soul. We're involved in the community, involved in activism, involved in struggle in some form. And so, you get this early sense inculcated into you that you need to be of value, you need to be of service to the world. But I think really how I get to the point where I'm in politics, policy, these different areas, goes back to high school. I did debating in high school. It's something I encourage all people I know who have younger siblings to encourage them if they're in high school to do debating. Because
I wish I did it.
Yeah, it's perfect. Like, I went to an all boys high school, so in some
Which one?
JP Boys.
Shame, man.
Yeah. It was a great experience, but being the debating nerd in a school of rugby, hockey, and cricket guys, we were the strange guys out, but it got me my full colors, it got me a half color, so I'm very happy about that. Thanks, JP. But debating really, it formulated this spark, because you get in an environment where you have to have an idea, or you get given a point to argue, and then you have to argue it, and you have to understand it from all its different nuances. And to do that, you need to become more well-informed. You have to begin to actually see things from the perspective of other people, and you have to think very critically in evaluating those perspectives and positions that you're in. And so debating pretty much ignites the flame, and then the world just takes it from there.
Just a disclaimer. Everything you said, Pretoria Boys High is better at all of those things.
I contest that. I contest that to the key.
So We Vote.
Yeah.
How did it come about?
So We Vote came about, it was 2022. I had, at the time, co-founded this thing called the Sundial Movement with a friend of mine, Pietra de Beer. It was a network for school students to connect on climate change. The best way to have young students involved in activism on a specific thing is have other young students who have walked that path, walk them through it, because they understand the path. They've been there before, and they're able to actually build off of that and make it a space that's not too scary. And so Sundial existed, and in Sundial, I met Tafir Mustafa. As a good friend of mine, lives in the Western Cape. Tafir was part of Sundial in the Western Cape, and he reached out to me, I think it was September of 2022. He said, listen, I have this idea for an organization. At the time, it didn't have a name, but the premise of the idea was, the elections are coming. I really don't think our generation is in a space where we can engage with this. The political content is still geared for our parents, and let's be honest, like some of them have social media accounts, but they do it really badly. And so Tafir comes with the idea, and we kick around with it for a bit, and then we go dormant. And then December 2022, Pala breaks, and it's like, things are happening. The president goes for that special NEC, and it's like, hey, is he coming back? What's happening? And so just that moment of uncertainty about the future, I was like, this is what 2024 might feel like. And I called Tafir and I said, okay, listen, I know someone who can join us. And that was Tara Ruiz, a very close, very good friend of mine. And she knows someone, and Tafir said he knows someone. And before you knew it, it was just like all of us friends, Western Cape, Gauteng, KZN, just coming together over Google Meets and saying, okay, guys, let's try rescue the 2024 election for young people. And so it was a crazy experience. None of us knew what we were doing. And keep in mind, 2022 is my grade 11 year, so I'm supposed to be working on my marks for matric. So it was a crazy experience. But
so you weren't even registered to vote?
Not
for
even,
the people. Okay.
Not even registered to vote, but I was already looking at 24 and being like, there's problems coming, big problems coming. But we built the plane as we were flying.
Shout out. So in terms of what So We Vote does on a day-to-day, what is it?
So We Vote fundamentally is a platform that people can go to get information on political parties, current affairs, so from the perspective of policy that is being tabled, that has to do with their lives. Think about it as we are breaking down things that are unnecessarily complicated so that people can actually catch up with what's happening about things that have to relate with their lives. And so we literally looked at the space and we said, the gap here is that the parties are really talking to themselves with their policies. They're talking to their core base, which they already have. Nobody's talking to the layman. Nobody's talking to people who are looking at what's happening in society and in South Africa, and is looking for someone that can resonate with how they feel, And so they put out all of these policy positions, they put out all of these speeches. They're talking, but they're not talking directly to people. But we in the So We Vote team, we're all policy nerds and politics nerds of some form. We more or less understand the language. So let's actually try and make it more digestible and understandable for people. And so that was the core idea of what we started with doing. And I think we've kept true to that mission. I'm very proud of that.
I've seen one of the things you guys did in the build up to the elections was to do a comparison of the different manifestos of the parties.
Yeah.
Can you give a summary of the ones you did do? Like, what was their position? Yeah, in their manifestos.
So one of the things I found very fascinating is that as we were going through them, we were like, hey, these things are unoriginal, eh? As we were looking to us as we were saying, if we were lecturers, the plagiarism score here would be so high. Turnitin would be hitting you with that red bar over 70%, because quite a lot of these parties frame themselves differently in how they speak to how their policies look. So you look at parties like, for instance, the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. So these parties actually, let me give a better example, the Democratic Alliance and Action SA. These parties frame themselves sort of as like the Hatfields and the McCoys, the never-ending feud between parties. Empowerment legislation, almost identical. You look at where they are in NHI, almost identical. You look at where they are in their housing policy, almost identical. These parties fundamentally are different in how they frame themselves, in the way their leaders tweet, the way their leaders talk in parliament, but in the actual policy itself, they're not that far. Both want to get rid of BEE. Both think NHI is a disaster, and they want to substitute it with, yes, an improvement of the public healthcare system, but one that, is more private sector orientated, But you ask voters of these parties, they say, no, action is better than the DA, or the DA is better than action on these things. But you look at what they say policy-wise, these guys are the same. But it's not like they carry themselves differently in leadership either. It's the same thing, just packaged differently.
And then the other side?
The other side, the social democratic movements, what you'd frame as the center to center left, more or less the same. I'd say the only one that goes probably as a major outlier in that area. Okay, before the election, before, I think it was November 2023, it was the EFF. They had by far the most progressive policy position: land, healthcare, social compact-wise, economic redistribution, education, the funding of free higher education. They had the most aggressive push to the left. And then you had MKP, which really confused us.
Did they have a manifesto?
They had a document, and I'm not sure if it was the manifesto. I'm not saying that disparagingly. I mean, given how it's like Kamala Harris, they launched just before the election. So we also weren't expecting like a fully fledged out document, but there was a document we read, and we were like, okay, very leftist progressive on certain things, but also leaning towards the right on certain things. And we had a long debate about, is this you went so far left that you ended up going right, or you made practical choices based on what your key constituency or the key constituency you're pursuing wanted. The thing about politics is people think that it's a very binary 1 and 0 thing. No, people are contradictory in nature. They will say they want subsidized social welfare for people in the form of SRD grants, but don't you dare touch their private healthcare, because they don't want to get rid of their healthcare. That they don't want to get rid of their discovery, their momentums, and so on and so forth. So it really made for an interesting conversation in the SOEVO team.
If you were to, and maybe we should have started with this, but to take a step back and for the layman, explain what is left, what is right, what is center.
So your right wing are what you'd call your conservative values. They're conservative, and then there's, I don't want to get in trouble. The fringe conservative, which is taking form in South Africa. So the right is typically people with more conservative values. These are very either religious or identity orientated policies, positions, and ideologies. So when I say religious, a party like the ACDP, the African Christian Democratic Party, that counts as a right-leaning conservative party. because their values are based off of Christian doctrine. That is the basis of their policy. And then you come to the center. Let's go center right. And in the South African context, you're really talking about the DA, though they're framed as more of in the global space, a liberal leftist party. It's like the major contradiction of South African politics. They're that globally, but because in South Africa, we have so much of a heavier left that pulls the political spectrum there, they actually fall somewhere in the center right. And those are policies that aren't like the ACDP, but tend to be more market orientated. So they are more pro what the market would be willing to accept. They're pro more what a middle class constituency would want. So they don't want very aggressive changes in legislation as it comes to fiscal policy. They don't want very aggressive changes as it comes to fiscal policy, monetary policies, the South African Reserve Bank. I have to keep those things. My economics lecturer is watching. I'll get in trouble if I don't. And so they follow that vein of pro-market orientated, not too aggressive stance, policies, things that would keep your investment banker happy. And then you have the markets. I think by far that's the best way to describe it, the DA side for the layman. And then you have the African National Congress, which is, they hold a very strange position in that they have their policies meet the center left, but also go far into what you'd call core leftist ideology in South Africa. These are progressive leftist ideologies, so social democratic centralism. This is a mixture of pro-market orientated yet also socialist leaning policy. What do I mean when I say this? You have an empowerment, a market orientated economic empowerment mechanism baked into your party's manifesto, such as BEE or what's this? Can't remember the name of this policy. And they were just talking about it now at the NEC. You have those sorts of policies that are pro-market orientated. And then you also have, you go a little bit further down the line, you have very socialist leaning policies such as owning of state utilities, the adoption of a mixed economic model. You let the private sector control what you're willing to let them control, but then there are certain key utilities owned by the state that must be within the control of the governing party and the government by extension, i.e. the Labour Party in the UK in the 40s, 50s, 60s, owning the majority of the utilities in the UK, 70s as well. Thatcher privatized in the 80s. And then you go further to the left, and then that's where you have the EFF planted. Now, this is Marxist-leaning, socialist Marxist-leaning policy. This has a strong government centralist control and less market orientated levers. So the EFF fundamentally views that the government is the best actor on the part of society, and they will therefore act in the best interests of society. So giving the government more control is in the best interests of the majority of the people. And that's a socialist, communist-leaning doctrine. So the EFF subscribes to that form of an ideology. And so you have this spectrum, leftist being here, right being here. And where the party falls in the spectrum is where their policies put them and also where they position themselves socially. The ACDP will always be on the right because of their strong support for religious-based policy, their even their opposition to certain policies and certain rights in the constitution because of how they fare against religious doctrine, in this case being Christian doctrine. And so that's how the spectrum falls. The right there, center, left. And then you go further than that, it's just, it's mayhem. It's mayhem.
So, I mean, for those, capitalism is right,
capitalism,
communism
right,
is left.
Yeah.
So if one is to take the EFF on the left and ACDP on the right, how sustainable or practical are these ideologies in practice?
Okay, this is where I get in a lot of fights with academics because I look at things from a very practical standpoint, and I think it depends on the person executing those policies. So you look at a society like Singapore, which by far has adopted a very practical approach to their development. They have in their society very conservative leaning ideologies that they follow. The state exercises major control over certain components of what Singaporean society can do. And Singaporeans are willing to accept that, But economically, they're very open, free markets. Let the market do what it wants to do. That's an example of a country that has taken the very practical approach, and it has worked out. Now, in the in the academic sense, you'd expect a country with consistency, both in its social and economic policy, to actually be one that succeeds. That is the model, But in the case of parties like the ACDP and the EFF, it's very hard because you have to actually look at the talent pool that they have within the party to actually execute the policies that they're proposing for. And on the basis of that, you can make an assessment of, okay, they subscribe to this. Can they succeed with it? And at the moment, I say no. I don't think they have capacity within their parties to be able to win government and then execute on what they want to do and then create a thriving society for South Africa. It's one of my major criticisms of the South African political space. Not enough people who are talented in the general politic and governing actually go into politics.
So one of the things you did focus on earlier was parties. There's a strong focus on whether it's NHI, BE. How much of this matter to the youth? What's the position of the youth on it? Because, we largely see the elders talking about it.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much of the voice of the youth is taken in.
It's very difficult to actually put a barometer on that. So as So We Vote, when we're going into the election, you'd notice with our infographics that we put online, there are certain things we focused in on. So we focused on the economy. Every young person cares about the economy because of the joblessness rate in South Africa at the moment. We focused on healthcare, mainly because of the cost of healthcare. So it's the economy, healthcare, social issues. So, your clear rights, religious rights, constitutional amendments that would be implemented by certain parties. We focused in on those things. And those things matter to young people because those are the things that have practical day-to-day implications on their lives. Beyond those key things, which I think is not that dissimilar from adults, they focus on the practical implication of certain policies on their lives. I haven't heard anyone talking about the budget speech was not something people talked about until 2% VAT was a factor. So you look at it from that perspective. People, young and old, look at politics in South Africa pretty much the same way, and that is what practically affects my life. Where do you stand on it? And on the basis of where you stand on it, then I'm going to make an assessment.
Now, there's so one thing that's a fact is youth participation, especially when it comes to voting, is low. When I was checking IEC stats in terms of registered voters between the ages of 18 to 30 to 29, there are about 3.5 million altogether. Yeah. But when one looks at the population, status I think had it at 20.8, but that's between 15. But if you adjust it pro rata or whatever, it should be about 16 million.
Yeah.
That gap, how does one get? That's about 13 million. How does one? What's happening with these 13 million people?
I read a Bloomberg article this morning that said Africa needs to find ways to employ its Gen Z youth. And I think that article is indicative of why we have that gap. You have people, I always make the point about my generation to say that we grew up watching South Africa being in its most dysfunctional era. So I was born 2004, in the middle of the Mbeki boom, but the Mbeki boom is somewhere up there with Takalani Sesame. Like that was the age I was at when it was happening, And so my real coming of age in South African politics, just like the rest of my peers, is fees must fall, Zuma must fall, junk status, all of these different negative blows, state capture, Gupta, Saxon World Gate, all of that stuff. That is where my generation comes of age into South African politics. And that's a very dysfunctional time to come of age into politics. And so you already have us entering the political arena with a context of it being inherently corrupt, dysfunctional. By the time when we're talking junk status, our parents are now starting to actually like be very tight with their purse. They're looking at, I remember my mother used to go to the petrol station and just give the guy a note, and whatever was done was done. Then I slowly start to see her before the guy comes and says, wait a minute, and she's just like fiddling in her purse. You start to pick up on those little symptoms of things are not going right. And then we adopt the pessimism from our parents on the political state of the country. That translates into 2024 means by the time we get to 2004, and we're voting, we don't trust these guys. We're told they're inherently corrupt, they're crooks, they don't care about us, and they don't do anything to dispel that notion. We see them with the way they treat our parents. They only come around during election year. And all of that feeds into this idea that, to quote the Michael Jackson song, they don't really care about us. And as a result of that, people just opt out of the political process. Afrobarometer did a poll where they found that actually, I forget the statistic, I think it's over 50%, I think it's over 60% of young people would prefer dictatorship, the style of what's happening in Rwanda and what Singapore had with Lee Kuan Yew versus democracy, because the strongman politics takes hold when you have this notion of the system is inherently corrupt. No one here is actually out for us. They're all out for themselves. And it's very difficult in that environment to convince people that your vote does have value. And it's just like it's a cocktail of all of those things. Add to that unemployment, add to that the massive barriers that now exist in accessing higher education. People don't talk about how the costs have actually just skyrocketed from when my parents were studying. And it's not even just adjusted for inflation. You look at the actual cost, it's exorbitant. All of these things feed into this. It's an us versus them. And then strongman politics takes hold and people are looking for the Messiah. My generation is looking for our Messiah, which is problematic because there is no Messiah coming.
What would that Messiah look like?
If I had the answer, I would be looking for that guy or gal. I'd be looking for them right now. If I had to put something to it, someone who, a person, okay, no, let me be correct here. It would be a group of people, not a person. Maybe they could get a person to front and be the visual of what this movement or positive shift looks like. But it would be a group of people that come together, having seen the challenges of South Africa, having formulated a plan, and then having honestly gone out into society to actually try and garner support for a mandate to actually change something about this. And this is not an election mandate, by the way. This is a society-wide consensus mandate that come election time, we're going this specific way. We've spent years explaining this vision to you. You've seen us in your community making the difference. You can trust us. So it's a group of people that come about and bring about this change, and in the best case scenario, they're incorruptible, they're relatable, but also incredibly intellectually gifted. They're short of rainbows coming out of their ears. These guys are just the perfect mixture of everything. But we're only going to get parts of that. So I convince young people, my peers, I don't like saying young people, I convince my peers that we need to engage in the political process substantively, and we need to actually be the ones challenging in a lot of these situations, because you find that if you're the only one asking questions like, why are we doing RDP housing so badly? Why does it take as long as it does for a contract, not even a contract, for the house to be approved, to be built, and that's even before the tendering process is done? Why does it take that long?
It takes months.
Why does it cost over R500,000 to construct an RDP house that doesn't even look that good? Why are we building them in the outskirts of cities? These should be like 15-minute cities. Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? Why? If you're the one asking those questions, then you should be the one putting your hand up. You should be the one talking to people about this. But there's this dissonance that exists in the space that is preventing that. And so you ask me what they look like, the messiahs, I tell them to go to your bathroom, turn on the light, and look in the mirror. You are the one you've been waiting for. This is the moment that we've been waiting for. So get off your bum and do something.
As a political system, right? You get the Chinese, who don't really have much of a democracy. Yeah. And a fellow BRICS partner, Russia, which I guess they do have a democracy, but home you can go until I think it's 2036. You look at the states, the states in UK have a relatively democratic system. Which do you think would work for South Africa? Is it something more leftist in terms of political system, or does the right work? Like what political system would work for us?
Okay, that's actually a question that could get me in trouble. But it could get me in trouble because, can I be very honest, I don't think we have a full consensus. You know? And the reason I say that is because you have so many people that vote for leftist parties. Like, okay, let me say this. I'll be very practical about this. There are so many black households that loved Julius Malema up until he said something relating to, he didn't say open borders, but something relating
like an open border policy.
Like an open border policy. And so many black households were like, how could he? So within the scope of our contradiction, I look more to a model like what the Singaporeans have and what the Nordic countries have. Because I think that they follow a very practical what works for us policy. So this works for us, this works for us, this doesn't work for us. Let's adopt that, let's use that, and let's build on that. You know, so the reason I say that is you need the efficiency and the practicality of the Singaporeans, but you also need the democratic openness of the Swedes. I'll do Sweden for as an example, one because I love the country. They made me a youth advisor at the embassy, so shout out Team Sweden. But you need that mixture because you can't have a Chinese system or a Singaporean system where you make it very harder for political and democratic contestation. Given South Africa's history, that's not going to work. Any government that comes within that context will be deemed illegitimate, and very easily, because, I mean, the case is already built. People will live that experience. So you need a mixture of these two, in my assessment, and you need to do it in a very practical way. And that being, you need to look at the needs of the society. You need to see where your society is. You need to see your ability to convince them and to actually take them forward in that direction. So you need the legitimacy to do that. You need the proper consensus to do that. And I think that's something South African parties fail to do. You know, Maibuya did a consultation process which was not concluded, but then they launched their manifesto, which, you know, one can speculate as to did they have enough from their consultative process to launch. They launched their bid for the LGs. They haven't actually launched their manifesto plan publicly, at least at the time of we're recording this. They can correct me in the comments. And so there's that disconnect of this is what we say we're doing, but this is actually what we want to do. And you know, if people actually did the political work of going, getting proper consensus, understanding where people are and actually talking to them, you wouldn't have the despondency in South African politics where there are so many people who say, listen, guys, I'm not going to vote for them because they don't listen to me. They don't talk to me. You know, if one or two parties people feel that way about, you know, that's fine. It's two parties. But when people look at the entire political offering and says, none of these people actually talk to my needs, none of these people actually relate to me, then you have a serious challenge. You have a serious problem, because what that means is the people who are supposed to be contesting for support from the public are failing to actually be at the point where the public can say, those people talk to me. That's my fighter. It's just the craziness of the South African process. So I hope I answered your question.
No, you did.
Yeah.
Guys, but also please don't forget to like, subscribe, share. It does mean a lot for growing the podcast and keeping it running. We recently had I had a discussion with General Secretary of Controlesa in a traditional house. And one of his inputs was that we have abandoned African way of leadership, whether it's chiefdoms and having the thing of the leader, people, and land. And he is saying that essentially we should try and go back to that and have African core at the base of our leadership model or political system, and just take the good things from the West. How does the youth feel about that? Because there's also, sorry, just to add on, there's also a perception out there that the youth are disassociated or have a gap from culture, heritage.
Yeah. the cheese boys who grew up in the private schools and talk my kind of English. Truthfully, I'll be very careful on this one, because I think on this one, I don't have sufficient authority to speak on it. And also after that Annalem daughter interview, I don't want people to say I talk for all young people. I don't. We're not a homogenous group. But I'd say, looking at the Western, Eastern approach, traditional values, traditionalism and heritage certainly do have a space to play. You could be a cheese boy that went to Sacred Heart and speaks my kind of English, i.e. that's me. Cheese boy went to Sacred Heart, speak this kind of English. You still understand the value of where you come from. You understand your heritage. You understand Otsile Nkadimeng batswa ko kae. Your parents not just feed you, they keep teaching you your history and your heritage, and you value that, especially given where South Africa's history comes from. So we do value that, but I think in the sense of this idea of, and it has been introduced by some parties of we should go back to nobility and royalty having some massive form of influence over society. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do, because I think it's very easy when you're already coming from a place of you have broad consensus and broad power. So people have already subscribed to this idea of your power to dictate and govern over their lives, and this is across society. If you're like the Saudi royal family, you already have that, and then it's no problem because your society is already acclimated to that. But South Africa is already acclimated to democracy, albeit slightly dysfunctional democracy. It hasn't given people what they wanted, and they push back very heavily against the notion that this democracy has delivered everything they wanted. That's a fair argument. But they push back, I think young people would push back against that idea, because they fundamentally, though they don't vote, they're still waiting for someone they can democratically elect and can all co-opt into. The idea of hereditary lineage, I think, is a very dangerous path, because it works for us, but then my kids might come and say, yeah, off with that thing. And then you have a very chaotic situation in a country. So there's a space for it. It's a valuable space. It's a space that still has influence over society, but it's not a space that will dominate all of society, that will control most of society. And that's just the reality of where the world is headed. We're more interconnected, more diverse. We are in a space where, at least in my mind, we should be able to see different cultures, heritages, and values as part of our own societal makeup. That means the multiplicity of values, perspective, heritage, values. I'll always come back to values, because ultimately this does tie back to values. Those things mean that the only way you can have any form of legitimate governance is through consensus. And that's what we're seeing now, a failure of consensus across politics, society, even, okay, actually I won't go there because I don't want to get cancelled. But you have this failure of consensus. I mean, the GNU people, their largest, greatest criticism against it is, where is this consensus on where South Africa should be going? So, it's, guys, if you're watching this, politicians, please, consensus. It's how you get us going in a direction.
On the consensus, you recently spoke at the launch or statement or press conference about the United for Change political party formation?
You know, I want to clarify, and I'm going to clarify this very strongly. Not as a, negative clarification, but it's just as a clarification for the record. I was at the launch, and I was at the launch to deliver a problem statement for them. This was not an endorsement. This was not a support statement. It was me giving them a snapshot of where South Africa is and what burden, what duty they have if they want consensus from society, if they want a mandate from society to lead, what they should be doing. And I want to clarify that because there are lots of people who say I was there to launch the party, to do this. I was not. I was asked to deliver a statement for them. I'm not a member. I was not there to support. And I must clarify that because we need to get these things right, We can't be in a space where it's illegitimate for you to be impartial and also go to a party and say, this is what you must be doing if you want to lead. It must be legitimate to do that because you are telling them where they could go wrong before they even start. And given where we are, I think that's needed. So I am not a member. I am not a supporter. I don't endorse any party. I'm impartial.
I can testament to that because he doesn't want to say who he voted for.
Yeah, it's a secret ballot.
Secret?
Yeah, it's a secret ballot. So when you see where this consensus-based coalitions are going to build, because I think Unite for Change is the bringing together of these parties because they realize that we're in a coalition era and it's better they come together and amalgamate rather than go separately and then eat into each other. The electoral maths being, you can have Rise, Bossa, and Good contesting in the same ward. Each takes maybe like 10. But then because they eat away at the base of another party like the DA, the ANC is then able to slip through because none of them actually appeal to the ANC's base. So the ANC actually, the ANC gets 30-something%, but they actually end up getting more votes than all of these ones together because they ate away at each other and could never get above the threshold. So the merger makes sense. This amalgamation makes sense. And from what I heard at the launch, they say they want to be very practical and consensus-based within their formation. I think that's good because we're in coalition country now. There is the era of one-party rule. I'm not going to say it's over. I do think it can come back because I think there's quite a lot of young political talent in my generation that sees everything I'm talking about here, Politics is just done so badly by this generation. It could come back, but for now, if you want to rule, if you want to get to a point where you're of influence and you can take counsel, because the LGs are coming up, you need to amalgamate.
LGs?
Yeah, local government elections.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry. Politics brain is on. You need to amalgamate. You need to centralize your base. You need to circle the wagons and build up all of your capacity because you are going to need it if you want any significant chance of winning. And so for Unite for Change, I think that made sense for them. But for other parties, I think they look at that and they say, oh, well, instead of shooting down 3 birds, I just take down 1. And it's the game of politics. And so I look forward to actually seeing how they do. I have my doubts, but I also have my hopes. We'll see.
One thing you've touched on a lot is consensus and the importance of consensus. Every time you say that, in my mind, I hear national dialogue and what it is intended to achieve.
Yeah.
Is there something off there? Because, does a national dialogue achieve this?
Okay. A national dialogue would in any other case, but the way this one was carried out was very badly. I was at the national dialogue. I always make the point, it's not a good reflection of me to say this, but I arrived 2 hours late. But I caught the program at the start. So even they were 2 hours late and the entire conversation was just chaotic. This is not an indictment fully on the people who ran the National Dialogue. I just think that it just had so many things against it that sabotaged it from the start. But I also do think that the way in which it was carried out, with government sort of leading it, yes, civil society came together, but there was a strong government presence there, strong government drive from it, for it. It made it quite chaotic. A national dialogue would help. But I think following an election year, that is not a good idea, because if you want to get a sense of where the country is, you sort of look at the election results and you say, none of us won, but none of us sort of lost either. Because they're all in government. Well, the ones that won are in government.
I got a solid 65%.
Yeah, it's you look at how those numbers were.
Yeah.
You do need to engage society. But I don't think government should be the one doing that engaging.
Who should do it?
I think initially the way former President Mbeki conceptualized it, or rather the Mbeki Foundation conceptualized this, and the other legacy foundation, was correct. You need civil society in its entirety engaging this process, and the outcomes of which they then take and say, this is a report of what our findings are. You are the government. You are receiving this now. The ball is in your court, in a sense, because I think you misunderstand the fundamental flaw of having government ministers and government officials and government presence at these things, is that it turns from a conversation about what we should be doing and what needs to change to a conversation of, you guys are doing this and you're eating this and you're doing this, and it turns from being a productive conversation on how we should be governing and organizing ourselves, and it turns into a complaint session, which you can't blame South Africans for, because they also need an outlet to ventilate all of their frustration and anger. And it's just, it is such a good idea, but it's executed so badly. And that's the unfortunate thing. I don't think it's going to be valuable, this one that's happened already. And it's such a shame.
There's a lot of pessimism, right?
Yeah.
Actually, and the mood is not great.
That's an understatement. Yeah.
What would you say has been done well?
Well, I say, and I said this in my speech, we're feeling the pain of the now. But let us take a look back at 20, 30 years ago. The middle class is larger now than it was 20 and 30 years ago, and was more diverse than it was 20 and 30 years ago. Yes, the cost of higher education has ballooned, but you have more black and brown people getting access to a good, high-quality education today than they were 20, 30 years ago. Albeit access is a problem, but, it's progress. Progress is progress. Slow, quick, tough, easy, smooth, stale. It's progress. You look at housing, you look at healthcare. There are more people who have access to healthcare today than they were 20, 30 years ago. And this is healthcare that actually meets their needs. Albeit, we do get those stories, Tembisa Hospital, we do get those stories, overcrowding at Krisani Baragwana. But still, I was talking to someone that they said, for all the complaints we have about South Africa's healthcare system, I got there. Yes, I waited long, but I still saw a doctor. I got my medication and I went home. We forget that part. I got my medication. Look in the United States, how much the cost of just your basic pharmaceutical medication. I don't want to use the D word, just in case it gets demonetized. People struggle in those spaces. So things have happened. Life generally is better 31 years on from democracy than it was pre the dispensation. But then again, the argument against this, the very simple takedown is, but you're comparing the benchmark being apartheid. But that is the point, isn't it? We have progressed from that point. We are in a better of position than we were when we took over from that place, because the alternative is Mandela's president. Yay, okay, close shop, done. But then what value is that? Things have happened, and we mustn't get so lost in the moment that we don't take a minute to actually take a look back at what we've done. And I think that's also a reflection both of the progress that we've made, but also the mistakes that we've made and how we can avoid them in the future. Because there's a song I love that says, it's just all a little bit of history repeating. Right now, history is repeating itself. People don't notice it, but it's happening again for a third time. And I'm not willing to say what it is yet because I don't want to put my thumb on the scale in any way. But once it's happened, I'll be like, okay, guys, TJ, let's talk. This is what I was talking about. But yeah, we've made progress. We must acknowledge that, especially legally. I think people forget the horrendous atrocities that were happening under the old system, the amount of abuse of power from a police and security standpoint that was just so awful that if we did not do the reforms the way we did, we would have a lot worse state on people violence. Forget criminal on society violence. I mean, repressive state violence, which is not all too unfamiliar for African countries on the continent. So yeah, we made progress and we must acknowledge that. But that doesn't mean we also can't be critical of the mistakes that we've made.
With that said, I assume something like Matla Commission is a way of, whether it's cleansing, bringing to light, dealing with. But that's my view. But what's your take on the commission itself and what's coming out of it?
So I think the Matla Commission and the ad hoc committee in Parliament are both indicative of two fundamental facts. And that is that the security cluster, albeit is not the repressive one I was just describing now, is one that is is proving more and more through testimony to be captured and systematically undermined. And it speaks to a need similar to what the Germans did to denazify the security cluster. So when I say denazify, like denazification was a very intense process that the Germans undertook of actually going into the entire state apparatus and finding the supporters of the little German man across the entire state apparatus. The Matlanga and Special Ad Hoc Committee are indicative of a need for us to do that, except against organized crime, political capture, and undue influence over the security cluster. We need to go down to the most tedious, granular detail of who and how and where this level of capture was not only able to happen, but who are we removing, how are we doing it, and how do we ensure that we don't lose more security. Security, I want to say security support, but that doesn't make English. Yeah. How do we do that? Because it's intense. I listened to some of it, I explained everything I did when I started the interview, so it's actually quite hard to keep up with quite a lot of it, but I listened to quite a lot of what's said there. And when you look at that and you're listening and you just come to the conclusion that the security cluster is run by a handful of people. Within that handful of people, only maybe like 2 are supposed to run it. And then the others are just like self-appointed, knew someone who knew someone, and then ended up having this influence over dockets, the police, the security cluster, and the intelligence, all of that. It's crazy. And I think that's what the Matlanga and the Special Ad Hoc Committee needs to be telling us, is that we need an intensive process of finding down to the granular detail who each of these people are. But do we have the capacity to do that? I seriously question that part, because how do you get the security cluster to investigate itself and have that be accurate? It's a very difficult thing.
Even IPID seems to be implicated now.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you even go beyond that. You talk about the National Prosecuting Authority. So you're even going outside of the security cluster. Now you're going into the prosecuting, talking about the legislature, talk of judges. It's I said somewhere that it makes for Narcos South Africa. If you're on Netflix, you know what I'm talking about. It is just that crazy. I can't give you a proper answer on that because it's still going on. That's the other thing. We can't speak conclusively on something that is still an active process. But from what we're seeing right now, quite a lot of the security cluster and the judiciary, it just needs a full-scale, intensive denazification process.
As So We Vote, what is... firstly, how do people get involved?
Oh, I love that. I love that question. So We Vote has, hopefully at the time of which this goes up, our website will be up. So we have a website, we have a TikTok, we have an Instagram, and we have a Twitter. So you can, either comment in our posts, DM us, or join on our website. We have volunteer, because we're a completely youth-run organization with no funding at all. That's a very important one because people often want to know, who are your funders? We don't have funders. We've never had funders since 2022 when we started this thing. It's all grassroots bootstrap, the entire organization. I've been a volunteer and I call myself executive chairman. It's really nice for the CV, but you can go and join us via all of these different platforms. We have volunteer groups within our policy, politics, social media, and mobilization departments. So you can get involved in any one of these four. And within there, you engage with other like-minded young individuals who want to get involved in the political process and help make South Africa's future a little bit brighter, and be the glimmer of light. You can sit home and be despondent, believe that nothing's going to happen, or you can wake up in the morning and say, I just want to get something good done. And fundamentally, if you have that inkling, why aren't you part of So We Vote? We're there. Reach out to us. DM us. Be cool, dude. DM us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, no, solid. And what is your message to youth in particular as to what their participation in politics should be, or why they should get involved?
I'm going to preface this by saying, how young people engage in politics is not just a thing of, I'm going to go vote. Albeit voting is the most important part of that engagement. It's not the only way. Attending a protest, joining an organization like So We Vote, going into your community and just talking to people about, how to actually try fix the situation there, whether it's refuse removal, how to get water turned back on in a community center, maybe even opening a library that the city has built. That is how you make a difference, because you can look at fixing South Africa as this one big push, or you can look at it as its death by 1,000 cuts. South Africa's corruption, South Africa's deficits, I don't think will be strangled in just one big force. Fundamentally, the thing that is holding us down will die by 1,000 cuts, and those are 1,000 actions you take every single day that move the needle in the direction it needs to go. So it starts with just being you, finding your space where you can contribute, where you can learn, where you can be informed about the things you want to pursue. Within those spaces, if you do all of that, you help to push the needle forward. But fundamentally, and I come back to this and I started with it, voting is and will always be the most valuable way you do, because there's only so much you can also do in those respects. You help push the needle, but there's only so far it'll go, and then you need voting and democratic support, consensus, to get the needle across the line. And so it's just that.
One of the general remarks or comments from people have that my vote doesn't matter. It's just a single vote. What has the toughest part for you been in terms of convincing people why they should vote?
I take two approaches. One is I'm like the friend counseling you after a breakup and be like, no, you're better than them. Literally, you are. Your vote, you can see yourself as this single individual whose life has no major sway on the direction of the country, whose vote has no major sway on the direction of the country. Or you can see yourself as a single raindrop in a much larger storm. Storms are powerful. I mean, you could talk to people in KZN and they can tell you what a storm can do. But you think about a storm, it is nothing more than just little drops of water all pushing in the same direction with wind, force, and a little bit of luck from God. And so you as an individual, you are a drop of water, yes. But if you stop to take a look around, you're a South African in a much larger country of over 60 million people. You are raindrop in a much larger storm. And so you can make an impact because the storm is brewing. The storm is pushing. If you disappear and your despondency spreads, much like a virus can, and we learned that during COVID, you are most likely to take out 2 other voters. They'll take out another 2. Before you know it, you've taken out 10, and then 100. And then before you know it, less than 30% of the population is voting in an election and nothing changes. It starts with you having the individual responsibility to say, this morning I'm going to get up and go vote. And I can guarantee you, if you wake up, if you're like me and you still live with your parents because you're a uni kid or whatever, if you wake up and you say, okay, I registered this morning, most likely someone else in the household is going to consider registering. And when election day comes around and you say, okay, I'm going out to go vote, you're not going to be the only one that leaves the house. Your actions are infectious. You can make a difference. Stop undermining yourself, man. Like, you're greater than that, So that's really the approach I take to it because it's the truth. It's the truth. If everyone just folded their hands and said, I can't do anything, then what really changes? But it's when we believe that things can shift and we actually are part of it, are putting our foot on the accelerator, adding to the force, things change. We propel society forward. That's where we need to be.
Thank you for sharing your insights and sharing information on So We Vote. Guys, please do get involved. So We Vote, Palatable Politics. There you subscribe. Outside you follow. You've got all the social platforms handles here, but we'll also put it out there for you. But once again, thank you very much. And you're going to come back.
Oh yeah, no.
Closer to local government election.
Yeah, I'm part of the furniture now. You're not getting rid of me that easy.
Yeah, thank you. Guys, like, subscribe, share. Palatable Politics.